He walked into the dealership wearing a weathered flannel shirt, khaki trousers and a pair of old walking shoes. His posture was steady but unhurried, the kind of gait that belonged to a man who had lived through both hard times and quiet triumphs. He approached the showroom floor and inquired about a luxury vehicle. The salesman gave him a once-over, eyes flicking with disdain. "I'm sorry, sir," he sneered, motioning subtly toward the door. "But I think you're in the wrong place. These vehicles start at $300." Across the showroom, a few staff members exchanged smirks, and nearby customers glanced at the exchange with thinly veiled amusement. The old man's cheeks flushed with quiet humiliation, but he said nothing. He simply turned and walked out. The next morning, a gleaming Rolls-Royce Phantom pulled up in front of the dealership, its custom midnight finish glinting in the morning light. The glass walls of Boston Prestige Motors reflected rows of exotic vehicles: Porsche, Bentley, Aston Martin, Ferrari, each more extravagant than the last. As the back door of the Phantom opened, the sales manager's jaw slackened. He never saw it coming. The man who stepped inside the dealership that day was Walter Green, a humble 73-year-old retiree known for his worn wardrobe and quiet manner. Few would guess that he was the father of Ethan Green, the billionaire CEO of Greentech Energy, one of the fastest-growing companies in the country. Walter's eyes moved slowly across the showroom, until they landed on a sleek midnight blue coupe, positioned on a raised platform. It was the perfect gift for his granddaughter Lily, who had just beaten the odds and been accepted to Stanford University. After everything she'd overcome, Walter wanted to give her something special. He could easily afford it, thanks to his son's success and the private trust Ethan had built quietly for him years ago. But Walter never flaunted money. It was never who he was. Across the room, Todd Whitaker, the same sales manager who had turned Walter away the day before, adjusted his tie and smoothed his suit. He prided himself on identifying high-end clients with a single glance, and the old man from yesterday hadn't made the cut. At the sight of Walter re-entering the dealership in the same modest attire, Todd's smirk returned. He nodded toward his coworkers, clearly expecting another laugh. "Good morning, sir," said a younger salesman named Liam, approaching with a polite tone. Walter smiled warmly. "Good morning. I'm here to take a closer look at that midnight blue coupe." Before Liam could respond, Todd smoothly stepped in. "I'll take it from here, Liam," he said, then turned toward Walter with a patronizing grin that didn't reach his eyes. "Looking for directions, sir?" And just like that, Walter's visit to the dealership began, a visit that would change more than just one man's perspective. Todd Whitaker's smile tightened. He'd seen this before: older folks wandering in, dazzled by polished metal and leather interiors, daydreaming about cars they'd never drive. And with month-end quotas looming and 3 serious buyers scheduled that afternoon, he had no time for fantasy. "That's the limited edition Azure," he said slowly, enunciating each word as if speaking to someone hard of hearing. "Only 15 were made this year." He paused, then added with theatrical politeness, "Perhaps I can direct you to our pre-owned division. It's a separate building, about 3 blocks east." Walter noticed how Todd's eyes flicked over his appearance, from the faded collar of his shirt, to the worn leather of his belt, and finally to the soles of his practical creased brown shoes. It wasn't the first time Walter had been judged like this. People often assumed that simplicity meant scarcity, and Walter had long grown used to that misunderstanding. He chose to live simply despite having access to wealth that would make most heads spin. "I'd really like to learn more about this one," Walter said calmly, nodding toward the Azure. "Would it be possible to see the interior?" Todd's lips curled into a tight, polite grimace. Behind him, 2 junior salesmen exchanged looks of amusement. "The Azure is by appointment only," Todd lied effortlessly. "Our serious clients usually book private viewings in advance." Just then a couple clad in designer outfits entered the showroom. The woman's handbag alone likely cost more than Walter's entire wardrobe. Instantly Todd's demeanor shifted, as though a switch had flipped. "Please excuse me," he said to Walter, not even making eye contact. "Liam can get you a brochure." He strode toward the couple, arms wide with rehearsed warmth. "Mr. and Mrs. Harrington, wonderful to see you again." From the side, Liam, the young salesman from earlier, approached Walter with an apologetic look. He couldn't have been more than 25, and his slightly oversized suit made him seem even younger. "I'm really sorry about that," he said quietly. "Would you like me to tell you more about the Azure?" "I would," Walter replied, his voice as warm as ever. Liam began enthusiastically listing the vehicle's specs: the hybrid powertrain, the hand-stitched Italian leather, the adaptive cruise A. As Walter listened, he noticed Todd leading the well-dressed couple directly to the Azure, the very car he'd claimed was appointment only. With a theatrical flair, Todd opened the door and gestured for Mrs. Harrington to step inside. "That's quite all right," Walter said softly to Liam, who had noticed the contradiction, and now looked visibly uncomfortable. "I understand how these things work." Across the room, Todd was in full performance mode. "This particular model has an 8-month waiting list," he said to the Harringtons, his tone rich with exclusivity. "But for special clients, well, I've secured early access." Mrs. Harrington trailed her manicured fingers along the dashboard. "It's exquisite, but I'm not sure about the color." "We can absolutely explore custom finishes," Todd assured her. Walter stepped closer, just within earshot, and spoke again, this time more directly. "Excuse me," he said. "I was hoping to inquire further about purchasing this model." Todd's smile vanished. "As I mentioned earlier," he said tightly, "this vehicle is currently being shown to these customers. Perhaps you could return another time, or as I suggested, check out our used selection." The Harringtons exchanged a glance, clearly uncomfortable with the tension. "I'm specifically interested in this car," Walter said steady and clear. "It's for my granddaughter's college graduation next month." Todd took a breath, stepped aside from the Harringtons, and lowered his voice, though not enough to keep nearby customers from overhearing. "Look, I get it," he said, barely masking his irritation. "People like to dream, but this is a place of business. That car costs more than most homes. I've been patient, but you're interrupting a legitimate sale." Shoppers nearby had begun to slow their steps, drawn to the growing tension. Liam lingered at the edge of the scene, looking "I'm prepared," Walter said, his voice calm and composed, "to make a cash purchase today." That was the moment Todd's professional facade cracked. He laughed, sharp and loud, a sound that echoed across the polished floors. "A cash purchase," he repeated, scoffing. "Really?" He raised his voice for effect. "Sir, this isn't a yard sale, we're talking about $250,000. Then with a sweeping gesture toward Walter's outfit, he added, "People who can afford these cars don't dress like that." Walter felt his cheeks flush, not from embarrassment, but from a slow-burning anger. Not for himself, he'd lived long enough to endure disrespect with grace, but for everyone else, everyone who'd ever been dismissed, discounted or degraded, based solely on appearance, this moment burned for them. "I believe my money is as good as anyone else's," he said quietly, meeting Todd's eyes without blinking. Todd stepped closer, his condescension now unconcealed. "Let me be clear," he said, voice tightening. "You are wasting my time, and frankly embarrassing yourself. Either make a proper appointment dressed for a serious discussion, or kindly leave the premises." The showroom had gone still. Even the Harringtons had stepped away from the car, visibly uncomfortable. "Is there a problem here?" A new voice cut in, calm, authoritative. It was Richard Mason, the owner of Boston Prestige Motors, drawn out by the escalating commotion. Todd straightened his tie and stepped back slightly. "No problem, sir," he said quickly. "Just explaining to this gentleman that we operate by appointment for serious buyers." Richard looked Walter over, the aged shirt, the worn shoes, the stoic expression. And then he looked at the customers watching, the salespeople lingering nearby, the way Todd towered over the old man. It didn't take long for Richard to make his judgment, and Walter saw it land on the wrong side. "I see," Richard said. "Your name's Walter Green," he replied plainly. "No titles, just Walter." Richard nodded once too formally. "Perhaps there's been a misunderstanding. Our clientele, well, they usually understand the exclusivity of our vehicle." "I understand perfectly," Walter said, voice still measured, though his chest tightened with every word. "Your sales manager has made your policies crystal clear." Todd took a step forward again, voice low and oozing with superiority. "If you're truly interested, which I strongly doubt, you can schedule an appointment, but I'd suggest bringing proof of funds. And next time, maybe dress the part." He swept his hand across the glittering showroom. "These cars aren't for just anyone." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Someone snickered. The smirks were subtle, but they were there, baked into the polished air of privilege. Walter took it all in, Todd's smug grin, the silent approval on Richard's face, the judging stares. He had been judged before, but rarely so openly, so publicly. "I see," Walter said again, his tone dignified, his back straight despite the invisible weight pressing on him. He turned toward the exit. The showroom remained silent, as he walked away, only broken by Todd muttering not quietly enough, "Some people just don't know their place." As Walter pushed open the glass door and stepped into the crisp morning light, He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. The sting of humiliation still sat sharp in his chest, but as the sunlight touched his face, a quiet, resolute smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. He tapped the screen and dialed. The green estate sat quietly on 5 wooded acres just outside of Boston, dignified, peaceful, and devoid of the excess most billionaires displayed. Its elegance was understated, much like the man who lived there. Ethan Green, now 41, was a tech visionary, whose innovations in renewable energy storage had revolutionized the industry. He'd built an empire without the need for headlines. His values ran deeper than PR. The moment Walter stepped into his son's home office, Ethan looked up from his desk. Years of observing his father had taught him to read the man's expressions with surgical precision. Something was off. "Dad," he said, rising from his seat. "What happened?" Walter eased into the leather chair across from him, and exhaled. "It was educational," he said, the ghost of a wry smile flickering. He recounted the events at Boston Prestige Motors, the condescension, the subtle and not so subtle humiliations, the dismissal, the laughter. He spoke evenly, without anger, but with the weight of someone deeply tired of watching history repeat itself. Ethan didn't interrupt. He simply listened, his jaw slowly tightening, eyes sharpening. "It's not about me," Walter said finally. "I can leave that place knowing the truth. But how many others walk in and get shoved out with nothing to prove them wrong? People like Todd don't just sell cars. They shape how folks see themselves. That's what bothers me." Ethan nodded slowly. This was what always moved him most about his father, his ability to turn pain into perspective. "So," Ethan said, folding his arms, "what would you like to do about it?" Walter thought for a long moment. "Part of me wants to do nothing. Just buy the car somewhere else." "But," Ethan prompted, "but then I remember Liam," Walter continued. "That young salesman, the only one who showed me kindness. And I think about the people who get treated like I did, without the privilege of calling you afterward. Those people deserve a response." Walter met his son's eyes, steady and sure. "But I don't want revenge. I want awareness." A slow smile began to pull at the corners of Ethan's mouth. "Well," he said, voice low, "maybe we can accomplish both." "Nothing dramatic," Walter warned, knowing his son too well. "We're not buying the dealership." Ethan chuckled. "No, that's far too cliché. But I do think a bit of education is in order." The two men leaned in, father and son, not plotting vengeance, but preparing a lesson, one that might just shift the way people see the world. Tomorrow the real visit to Boston Prestige Motors would begin, not with judgment, not with anger, but with truth, and an opportunity to learn, for everyone watching. When Walter entered his son's home office, Ethan Green looked up from behind his desk, instantly sensing something was off. Years of deep connection forged through shared struggles and quiet respect had taught Ethan to read his father's face with uncanny precision. He immediately set aside his tablet. "What happened?" he asked, rising from his chair, concern already etched into his features. Walter let out a slow breath and sank into the nearest leather armchair. The morning's events, the sting of condescension, the cold dismissal, the judgmental stares, settled onto his shoulders like a quiet weight. "It was educational," Walter said with a half-smile that never made it to his eyes. He recounted the visit to Boston Prestige Motors, the salesman's tone, the humiliation in front of strangers, the blatant assumption that his clothes somehow invalidated his intention. As he spoke, Ethan's expression darkened, though he remained silent, letting his father unload every detail without interruption. "It's not about me," Walter concluded, folding his hands together. "I know who I am. I can walk away from something like that with my dignity intact, because I know the truth." He looked up at his son. "But how many people get treated like that every day, without knowing they actually deserved better? How many internalize that kind of dismissal and believe it?" Ethan nodded slowly. That was always what moved him about his father. Walter didn't get angry for himself. He got angry for everyone else. His quiet strength had never been about pride. It had always been about people. "So," Ethan said gently, "what do you want to do about it?" Walter leaned back, exhaling. "Part of me wants to do nothing," he admitted. "Just buy Lily's car somewhere else, and let the whole thing go." "But," Ethan asked knowingly, "but then I think about that young man, Liam," Walter said. "He treated me with kindness, didn't flinch at the suit or the shoes, just talked to me like a human being." He paused, then added, "And I think about all the people who go through that kind of judgment, and don't have a voice, no way to answer back." Walter looked directly at Ethan now, his gaze steady. "Those people deserve more than just a quiet walk away. They deserve to be seen." Ethan's face sharpened with purpose. These people, Walter continued, need to understand that worth isn't determined by appearance. Not by age, not by shoes, but I don't want revenge, son. I want awareness. A slow, deliberate smile formed on Ethan's face, a familiar one that Walter had seen since his boyhood, often right before Ethan built something brilliant. I think, Ethan said, we can do both. Walter gave him a side-eyed look. Nothing dramatic. Ethan laughed. No buying the dealership and firing the entire staff. Got it. Exactly, but maybe. Ethan leaned forward, eyes twinkling with mischief and purpose. A little education is in order. And so father and son began to craft a plan, not for spectacle, not for headlines, but for something more enduring, a lesson wrapped in humility and truth. Something that might just shift a few minds, and open a few eyes. When they finalized the details, Ethan looked up from his notepad. Are you sure you don't want to come along? Walter shook his head. This isn't about me watching them squirm. It's about them learning something they clearly never have. Then, after a beat, he smiled softly, but I expect a full As evening settled over the green estate, Ethan made several quiet but purposeful phone calls to his team, to his assistant, to a personal contact in the automotive world. Arrangements were made. By morning everything would be in place, and Boston Prestige Motors, and especially Todd Whitaker, would receive a lesson they wouldn't soon forget. Not in rage, not in retribution, but in respect, and the cost of forgetting what it means. If you're enjoying this story, hit that subscribe button and join our community of story lovers. Now let's get back to see what happens next. The following morning arrived with picture-perfect weather. Todd Whitaker entered Boston Prestige Motors, with his usual confident stride, his signature navy tie perfectly aligned. Yesterday's encounter with the old man in worn shoes had become nothing more than a joke, a story he'd already spun for his colleagues over post-work. Another delusional wanderer, he'd said. Another fantasy shopper pretending to belong in a world of luxury. The showroom gleamed under strategically placed lighting, each vehicle angled for maximum allure. Lamborghinis, Bentleys, Ferraris. Names that dripped exclusivity. Todd had just finished the morning staff meeting, reminding his team firmly about the importance of qualifying customers. Remember, he'd said, pacing in front of the sales desk. Our time is valuable. We cater to a specific clientele. It's not elitism, it's efficient. Liam, the young salesman, had remained quiet. His discomfort hadn't gone unnoticed. Todd made a mental note to coach him later about the importance of reading customers more effectively. Then, precisely at 10:17 a.m., a sound stopped conversation mid-sentence. The low, distinctive purr of an engine, smooth, powerful, unmistakably elite, pulled every gaze toward the floor-to-ceiling windows at the front of the showroom. A vehicle unlike any other glided to a stop outside. Even Todd, who prided himself on being unmoved by luxury, despite bathing in it daily, felt his pulse quicken. The car was a Rolls-Royce Phantom, extended wheelbase. But not just any Phantom. This one had a custom midnight blue finish that seemed to shimmer and shift under the sunlight, like polished obsidian beneath water. The paint job alone was rumored to cost more than most people's annual salary. Conservative estimates would place the vehicle north of $1.2 million. Is that? Murmured someone behind the desk. Richard Mason, the dealership's owner, had emerged from his office, drawn by the sudden silence and reverent stares. That's the Phantom, Todd confirmed, already moving toward the entrance. Extremely rare configuration. A uniformed chauffeur stepped out, with white-gloved precision, walked around and opened the back door. From the rear passenger seat emerged a man of commanding presence. Tall, composed, effortlessly distinguished, he wore a gray suit that whispered money, not shouted. His salt and pepper hair was perfectly groomed, and his posture radiated calm authority. Todd's instincts ignited. This wasn't just a good prospect. This was the kind of client dealerships fought over, the type who didn't buy cars but fleet, the kind whose signature could hit an entire quarter's sales goal in a single stroke. Good morning, sir. Welcome to Boston Prestige Motors, Todd called out, intercepting the visitor before anyone else could approach. Todd Whitaker, sales manager. It's an absolute pleasure to have you with us today. The man regarded Todd for a long, unreadable beat, then offered a firm handshake and a polite smile that didn't quite touch his eyes. Ethan Green, he said simply. Todd's mind raced. The name was familiar, but the face no, the aura was unforgettable. Still, the memory didn't quite click. Regardless, The car and the tailored silence that followed it spoke volumes about the man's financial status. Mr. Green, of course. What an honor. What brings you to our humble establishment today? Todd said, gesturing smoothly toward the gleaming display of new arrivals. Perhaps I could show you some of our latest arrivals. We just received. Ethan raised one hand, stopping Todd mid-speech. I'm here for a specific vehicle, he said calmly. The Azure Coupe. Midnight blue. Todd's face lit up, relief flooding in. Ah, excellent choice, sir. One of only 15 made this year. I'd be delighted to show it to you. It's actually, I know where it is, Ethan said, cutting in gently but firmly. My father was here yesterday. He was interested in that car. Todd's practiced smile faltered, only slightly. Your father? Ethan's expression cooled a few degrees. You may not remember him, he continued, voice still measured. Wore an old flannel shirt, leather shoes, mid-70s. You told him, and I quote, that perhaps he'd be more comfortable looking at used cars. Todd's smile stiffened. Behind him, Liam blinked rapidly, realizing what was happening. I wasn't aware that was You were very aware, Ethan said. You judged him the moment he walked in. You humiliated him. In front of customers. In front of your staff. There was a Todd straightened his jacket. Mr. Green, perhaps there was a misunderstanding. We try to assess customer readiness as tactfully as possible. This is, after all, a high-tier establishment. My father taught public school for 40 years, Ethan cut in, voice tightening. He raised me alone. He doesn't wear designer anything because he doesn't care for appearances. He's the reason I've built what I've built, and you dismissed him like he was a nuisance. By now the showroom had gone nearly silent. Employees froze in place. Customers pretended not to listen, but their ears were tuned like antennas. Mr. Mason, Ethan turned to the dealership's owner, who had paled considerably. Do you endorse this kind of behavior? Richard Mason's mouth opened, then closed. Mr. Green, I know. Of course, if we had known, you didn't need to know his name to treat him with respect, Ethan said flatly. Then he turned back to Todd. The Azure was for my father's granddaughter, my niece. A gift. We're still going to buy it. Todd let out the faintest breath of relief. But the corporate fleet we were planning to replace 7 cars, that order is gone. We'll take our business elsewhere. Todd's color drained. Mason looked like he might faint. Ethan wasn't finished. There is, however, one thing you can do. Todd looked up quickly, desperate for a second chance. Anything. My father and I run a non-profit, Ethan said. It's called Green Hope. We support underserved communities, children, seniors, veterans. We're hosting a fundraiser next month. You're invited, Ethan said, then added, not as a guest. Todd blinked. I'm sorry, as a volunteer, Ethan clarified. Set up crew, serving tables, helping the kids. Maybe you'll learn something about value. Silence. And Liam? Ethan turned to the young man. You're the only reason we're still buying the car. You treated my father like a human being. Liam looked stunned. Thank you, sir. Handle the paperwork, Ethan said. All of it. He turned back to Todd with a single nod. Next time you think someone doesn't belong, think twice. You may be looking at the reason your dealership still exists. And with that, Ethan walked toward the showroom office with Liam at his side. Todd remained rooted in place, no longer the one in control, no longer the expert in qualifying anyone. The blood drained from Todd Whitaker's face as realization dawned. Walter Green, the old man in the worn flannel shirt, the one he had dismissed, condescended to barely 24 hours ago, was Ethan Green's father. Behind him, Liam let out a soft gasp, but quickly covered his mouth. He'd been hovering near the edge of the confrontation, eyes wide. Miss Green? Todd stammered, his usual smooth delivery failing him completely. There must be some misunderstanding. We welcome all customers here. By now Richard Mason had hurried over, sensing something serious was unfolding. Is everything all right, Todd? He asked, trying to maintain his polished demeanor. Ethan turned to the owner with calm precision. You must be Mr. Mason. Yes, Richard said quickly. Indeed. Welcome to Boston Prestige Motors. Mr. Green. Thank you, Ethan said, tone polite but cold. I was just explaining to Mr. Whitaker that my father visited your showroom yesterday. He was interested in purchasing the Azure Coupe as a gift for his granddaughter, and he was treated, let's say, in a manner that I find deeply troubling. Richard's face shifted from polite professionalism to growing concern. I'm sorry to hear that. I believe I may have seen him briefly, but I wasn't aware of all the details. The details, Ethan said, folding his hands calmly in front of him, include your sales manager implying that people who dress like my father don't belong here, that he would be better off looking at used cars. that this showroom was for a certain class of people. By now, a crowd had formed. Staff from the service center had drifted into the showroom. A few customers paused by the espresso station, pretending not to watch, but everyone was listening. "Mr. Green," Todd said again, desperation leaking into his voice. "If there was any kind of misunderstanding." "It wasn't a misunderstanding," Liam said suddenly. All heads turned toward the young salesman, who looked as surprised by his own voice as everyone else. "Mr. Green's father was treated poorly," Liam said, standing straight. He was clear and polite about his interest in the Azure, and he was dismissed repeatedly because of how he looked. Todd shot Liam a withering glare, but the damage was done, the truth was out, and it had an audience. Ethan turned back to Richard Mason. "You know," he said, voice still calm, "it's interesting. My father, the man your team turned away, happens to co-manage our nonprofit foundation, Green Hope. He's helped raise over $50 million for adaptive equipment, youth programs and senior care centers across the country." He paused deliberately, letting the weight of the number settle into the quiet tension around them. "My father dresses simply because he chooses to live that way, because he believes humility keeps him close to the people he helps. It's not because he has to, it's because he still remembers what it's like to have nothing." Across the floor, Richard Mason had turned visibly pale. "Mr. Green, I assure you," he stammered, "this is not how we conduct business. It doesn't reflect the values we." "Actions speak louder than mission statements, Mr. Mason," Ethan said, cutting him off. The silence returned, heavy, almost reverent. "Now," Ethan continued, tone sharp but even, "regarding the Azure, we're still purchasing that car for my niece, as my father originally intended." Todd perked up slightly, hope flickering in his eye, but Ethan added, his tone dropping slightly, "I was also considering replacing our company's entire executive fleet, 7 vehicles, and updating a few from my personal collection." Richard's eyes wide. A sale of that magnitude would blow past their quarterly targets in a single transaction. Todd inhaled as if preparing to jump in, until Ethan raised a hand to stop him. However, Ethan said slowly, clearly, "After yesterday, I find myself questioning whether this is the kind of establishment that deserves such an investment." The air turned to glass. Todd looked like he might collapse. His face had gone from crimson to ghost white. Ethan glanced around at the stunned faces, then added quietly, "The cost of a lost sale doesn't end at the register. Sometimes it starts at the door." He turned to Liam. "Let's go take care of the paperwork." Liam blinked. "Yes, sir. Right this way." As they moved toward the sales office, Ethan paused beside the Azure coupe, running a hand lightly across its smooth hood. "My father has excellent taste," he said, more to himself than anyone else. Behind him, Todd Whitaker remained rooted in place, staring into the gleaming paintwork that now reflected more than just overhead lights. It reflected everything he had done wrong. "Mr. Green," Richard Mason began desperately, wringing his hand, "I can't apologize enough for this unfortunate incident. I assure you, this is not how we conduct business. Please, allow us to make this right." Ethan regarded him for a long moment, measuring not just the words but the sincerity behind them. "Perhaps," he said finally, "but it will require more than just selling me cars." "Anything," Richard said quickly, eager to salvage what he could. "The Green Hope Foundation is hosting a benefit gala next month." Ethan, "We're raising funds for a new adaptive sports complex for children with physical disabilities." Then he turned his gaze toward Todd Whitaker, who stood pale and rattled. "I think your presence there would be educational." Todd swallowed hard. "Yes, sir." "Not as a guest," Ethan clarified, "as a volunteer. The foundation is always in need of people willing to help with setup, to assist the children, to witness the work we're doing up close." The implication was clear. This was no punishment. This was a second chance, wrapped in humility and purpose. Ethan turned back to Richard. "Also," he said, "you might consider implementing some internal training on unconscious bias. I can connect you with several excellent consultants." Richard nodded quickly. "Absolutely, we'd welcome it." Then Ethan turned to Liam, the young salesman who had spoken up for his father. "I'd like you to handle all the paperwork," Ethan said, his tone warm now. "Starting with the Azure, for my niece." Liam's eyes widened. "Me? I thank you, sir. I'd be honored." "Good," Ethan said with finality, then nodded toward the hallway. "Now, shall we discuss the specifics of that corporate fleet?" As they walked toward Mason's office, Ethan paused in front of the Azure coupe, running his fingers lightly along its smooth body. "My father," he said quietly, "has excellent taste, doesn't he?" Behind him, Todd Whitaker stood motionless, watching everything he'd built. His certainty, his sense of superiority unravel under the weight of truth. For the first time he saw himself clearly, not as a gatekeeper of luxury, but as a man who had failed the most basic human test. Not how he treated those he believed mattered, but how he treated those he assumed did. 1 month later, the Green Hope Foundation Gala transformed the grand ballroom of the Boston Plaza Hotel into a celebration of resilience and possibility. Children in wheelchairs zipped around joyfully on a makeshift basketball court. Donors mingled with family. Adaptive equipment displays sat beside easels of hand-drawn artwork. The air buzzed not with pity, but with purpose. Near the entrance, wearing a simple staff uniform and a name badge that read volunteer, stood Todd Whitaker. Gone were the designer suits and cufflinks. In their place rolled up sleeves, scuffed sneakers, and something new in his eyes, humility. He held a clipboard in one hand, and with the other helped guide a young boy in a wheelchair through the crowd. The boy's name was Thomas, and he'd insisted Todd be his assistant for the night. The past month had changed Todd. What began as an obligation, the price of professional survival, had become something more. He had watched children confront impossible challenges, with courage and grace. He had spoken with parents whose faces bore years of quiet strength, and he had truly listened for the first time in years. Across the room, Walter Green, dapper in a gray sport coat, chatted with a group of guests. Ethan Green stood beside him, effortlessly blending into the room despite his quiet celebrity. Then from the other end of the ballroom, Eleanor Green, now reimagined here as Eleanor, Ethan's sister and co-founder of the foundation, approached Todd with a calm, graceful presence. She wore a simple navy blue dress, no jewelry but a watch and a warm, knowing smile. "How are you finding the experience, Todd?" she asked. Todd paused. He considered the question, not brushing it off like he once might have. Then with real weight behind his words, he replied, "Humbling, and necessary." Eleanor nodded. "Thomas seems to have taken a liking to you," she said, gesturing to the boy who was now waving from the dessert table. "He's teaching me about adaptive basketball," Todd admitted. "Apparently I have terrible form." Eleanor laughed, a soft, genuine sound. "He's an honest coach." Todd's expression grew more serious. He looked at her directly, his voice lower. "Mrs. Green, I know I've apologized formally, but I need to say it again to you. I'm truly sorry for how I treated your father. There's no excuse." Eleanor held his gaze for a moment. Then she nodded, not unkindly. "You're right, there isn't," she said plainly. "But the question isn't whether you messed up, it's whether you learned from it." Todd nodded slowly. "I have. I'm still learning." "Good," she said. "Because people like you who've stood on the wrong side and crossed over, you're the ones who can teach others how to see better." A moment passed between them, not of redemption but of realignment. Just then Ethan joined them, placing a hand on Todd's shoulder. "I hear you've been mentoring Liam at the dealership," he said. "He speaks highly of you." Todd looked stunned. I've been trying." "Well," Ethan said with a grin, "we're still looking to replace that fleet." Todd blinked. You still want me to handle it?" "I do," Ethan said. "Not because you're perfect, but because you get it now." Across the room, Walter Green smiled from a distance, watching the exchange. For a man who had once been told he didn't belong, the room now pulsed with people who did. Kids who'd been written off, parents who'd fought unseen battles, and a man once arrogant, now aware, who was learning that worth was never measured by clothing, wealth or posture, but by how we treat one another when we think no one important is watching. Todd Whitaker's expression had grown serious. "Mr. Green," he said quietly, turning to face Walter directly, "I know I've already apologized formally, but I need to say it to you, clearly. I'm truly sorry for how I treated you. There's no excuse." Walter looked at him, calm and steady. "You're right," Walter replied. "There is." He didn't say it with malice, just truth, and that made it all the heavier. "But the real question," Walter continued, "is what you've learned." Todd took a breath. His voice was steadier now, anchored by humility. "That worth isn't determined by appearance, position or possessions," he said. "That everyone deserves respect, until they give you a reason to think otherwise. Not the other way around." Walter nodded slowly. "Good lessons," he said. "Expensive ones too." "I can imagine," Todd murmured, glancing around the gala space. The laughter, the smiles, the quiet presence of donors and families. He thought of the fleet deal that never happened, of the corporate account that vanished with a single sentence from Ethan Green. "And yet, worth every penny," Todd said sincerely. Across the room, Ethan Green approached, placing a gentle hand on his father's shoulder. "Mr. Green," Todd said, quickly straightening. I was just sharing a few things with your father. Ethan smiled. I also heard you've gotten quite involved with the adaptive sports program. Yes sir, Todd said, with a bit of pride now. In fact, I've signed up to continue volunteering even after my required hours are over. He hesitated, then added with quiet honesty, and I've been working with Mr. Mason to revamp how we qualify clients at the dealership. No more judging by shoes or shirts, just people. Ethan nodded, clearly pleased. I'm glad to hear it, Then, after a thoughtful pause, he added, which reminds me, Todd blinked. That corporate fleet I mentioned, we're still in the market, Ethan said casually. Perhaps you'd be willing to handle the transaction. Liam speaks highly of how you've been mentoring him. Todd's mouth opened, but no words came out for a moment. Finally he managed, I would be honored, Mr. Green, truly honored. Good, Ethan said, then turned back toward the gala crowd, his father beside him. Later that evening, as the event wound down, Todd stood by the entrance, watching Walter and Ethan Green, working the room, not flaunting their wealth or power, but offering it freely in service of something bigger. Walter stooped to greet a young girl in leg braces. Ethan quietly refilled drinks for the volunteers. They weren't icons tonight, they were present. Todd reflected on the arc of his month, the arrogance he once wore like armor, the snap judgments that had once seemed like efficiency. Now they felt hollow, unforgivable. A month ago he would have dismissed someone like Walter Green on sight. Now he understood. True value lives deeper than fabric, deeper than bank accounts or business cards. It lives in how we show up when nobody is watching. As Todd turned to help Thomas, the 9-year-old in the wheelchair, back after a photo session, the boy looked up and grinned. You know what, Mr. Todd, Thomas said with a toothy smile. You're pretty cool for a grown-up. Todd laughed, for real, not performative, and ruffled the boy's hair gently. Coming from you, Thomas, that's the best compliment I've had in a long time, and he meant it. We all make judgments based on appearances, whether we admit it or not. But as Todd Whitaker discovered, looking beneath the surface can reveal extraordinary people and life-changing opportunities. If this story resonated with you, hit that subscribe button and join our community of story lovers. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever been misjudged based on your appearance, or misjudged someone else, only to discover how wrong you were? Your story might help someone see with new eyes. And remember, the true measure of wealth has nothing to do with what's in your bank account. It's about how you treat others when you think no one important is watching. See you in our next story, where another powerful lesson awaits.